Hi, I'm Wayne Morgan. I live in Ventura, California. I'm a retired electrical engineer, and I'm on the Climate Action Plan team, which is one of the climate interest groups of the U.S. League of Women Voters. And also, Bill, would you like to say hi? And Jackie, would you also like to say hi?
Sure. You want to say hi first, Jackie, and then I'll
Oh,
follow ours.
all right. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Jackie Rivas. I'm a member of the Arlington and Alexandria League here in Virginia, and I'm also on the Virginia League's Climate Interest Group.
So my turn. Hi, I'm Bill Kale. I'm with the League of Women Voters of Central Kane County, just outside Chicago. I'm a climate specialist for our statewide issues and advocacy team.
Thank you, Bill. Um, I'll just share my screen here just real quick. I have some slides. So this is the Climate Interest Group website, and the Climate Action Plan Group also earlier, a few years ago, wrote a document about how you can influence your local governments with their climate action plans. So we have I have a number of suggestions for them to improve their climate action plans so that they can trans meet some climate goals of low greenhouse gas emissions. And this is the 10 actions that we wrote, and this is available on the website, the Climate Interest Group website, under the Climate Interest or the Climate Action Plan Group. And here is a few QR codes for getting to that climate action. So with that, we did make a video that we will show you at this time, and this video will be available to the local leagues to show. So we hope that you'll find it useful and that you are able to show it to your local leagues and get some interest in taking climate action at the local levels. So I will start the video. Just one moment. Hello, and welcome to the introduction to Power Talk. I'm Wayne Morgan, a member of the Ventura County League in California and a retired electrical engineer.
My name is Jackie Rivas. I'm a member of the Arlington and Alexandria League in Virginia, and I'm also on the Virginia League's Environmental Interest Group.
Hi, I'm Bill Kale, and I'm from the League of Women Voters of Central Kane County in Geneva, Illinois. And I am the climate specialist for the Issues and Advocacy Group for the League of Women Voters of Illinois. We are members of the Climate Action Plan team, or the CAP team, within the League of Women Voters U.S. Climate Interest Group called SIG. The League's document, Impact on Issues, enumerates the League's positions on many issues, and within the League's position on environmental protection and pollution control, the League supports environmentally sound use of energy resources with consideration of the entire cycle of the energy production, and predominantly relying on renewable resources, to name a few. Power Talk was written by the CAP team for League members to help us become more knowledgeable about sourcing electric power so that we can advocate for environmentally friendly and sound energy policy. Now I'll hand it off to Wayne.
Thank you, Bill. So now we'll give you a quick tour of Power Talk. Here are the sections of the document. I will be covering sections 1 through 4. Section 1 is the generation of electrical energy. Electric power is derived from other sources of energy, so electric power must be generated. PowerTalk describes the characteristics and environmental impact of sources and generation methods listed here. I'm not going to discuss them all, as you're probably familiar with them, and you can always read about them in PowerTalk. But I will say that I'm enthused about geothermal power. It can supply constant power and employs drilling technology, so some workers in the oil industry can transition to work on geothermal projects. And for some sites, like Salton Sea, California, the hot brine that is used contains lithium and other salts that can be extracted. In this section, you'll also find definitions of some commonly used units of measure: the volt, the ampere or amp, the watt, and the watt hour. Section 1.3 describes some terminology that's used in the industry. Distributed energy resources, known as DERs, are sources that are usually small-scale generation resources located near the end user. Centralized sources are usually large-scale facilities that need to use transmission lines to send power to end users. Firm energy is an energy source that is predictable and can be relied upon, such as hydro, fossil fuel plants, nuclear, and geothermal. Sources like wind and solar are intermittent sources. They can't be relied upon to supply a predictable amount of energy. Dispatchable refers to energy that can be supplied upon demand. Many firm energy sources are dispatchable. A gas-fired generator, known as a peaker plant, is called upon to supply energy during high demand and is a prime example of a dispatchable energy resource. Virtual power plants, or VPPs, are groups of distributed sources coordinated by software to act as a large, stable electrical source. Some VPPs include homeowners that have solar. Nameplate energy, or capacity, is the maximum amount of energy that the source can supply. Stranded assets refer to assets that are retired earlier than their original life expectancy. Legacy contracts refer to contracts for sources that are no longer desired but legally binding. Packetized energy is a relatively new concept to coordinate the supply and consumption of power. It does so by trading packets of energy between suppliers and consumers. So in the packetized energy model, a user may send a message to the controlling entity and request 5 kilowatt hours of energy in the next 15 minutes, or it may say that it has 5 kilowatt hours of energy that it can supply in the next 15 minutes. The controlling entity will then take this information and coordinate the transactions. So getting back to the League's position to have predominant reliance on renewable resources, where do we stand? Here is a graph of the amount of electric power that coal, gas, nuclear, and renewables generated over the last 72 years. In 2022, fossil fuels supplied about 60% of the U.S. electric power. So we have quite a ways to go. But the good news is that the cost of renewables, that is the levelized cost of electricity, is now competitive and even less than fossil fuel generators in many areas of the country. Now we come to Section 2, transmission of electrical energy. The electric grid is a network of power plants and transmission lines that distributes power to end users. Here's a picture of the grid. Power plants generate the electricity, which then gets converted to high voltage, then transmitted over transmission lines to local substations where the voltage is lowered for distribution to end users. The transmission lines are sometimes very long and operate at very high voltages, up to 1 million volts. The substations take the high voltage and convert it to lower voltage for local distribution. The local lines are typically 15,000 volts. Near the consumer, the voltage is dropped to 240 volts and 120 volts by transformers, which are typically mounted on utility poles. 2.3 describes future transmission needs. In a nutshell, the grid needs to be able to transmit more power, share power across the U.S., and be smarter. There are several technologies that can help, called grid enhancing technologies, that include sensors and software to squeeze more power carrying capacity out of the existing lines. As distributed resources are added to the grid, things get more complicated. In this diagram, the thick green lines show the flow of centralized power sources, but the thinner green lines can have power flowing in either direction, so this complicates the coordination of power flow across the grid. Section 2.4 describes microgrids. A microgrid is a small network of electricity users with a local means of generation. Microgrids are usually attached to the grid, but they are able to function independently. They typically have solar, batteries, and some form of backup like a gas-powered generator. A microgrid can power a single facility like a school or a hospital, or a larger area like a neighborhood, business district, or a town. And it's estimated that the energy generated by microgrids will grow by almost 300% by 2030. Section 3 describes some important terms to know that are related to distribution. Net energy metering, or NEM, and feed-in tariffs are both policies to encourage investment in renewable energy. NEM gives a credit for the amount of electricity sent back to the grid. This credit can then offset costs of electricity consumed. Feed-in tariffs are contracts to supply power at a fixed rate over a set period of time. Community solar is any solar project within an area whose energy benefits multiple consumers like individuals, businesses, and nonprofits. Section 4 describes storage technologies. Electricity needs to be used or stored as soon as it is generated. Intermittent sources like wind and solar require storage to optimize their utility. Even though storage adds cost to the system, Lazard's LCOE analysis shows that solar and wind combined with storage is cost competitive with other power sources, and these costs are still going down. Section 4.4 identifies different types of storage, such as pumped hydro, gravity storage, compressed air, flywheels, batteries, thermal storage, and hydrogen. I want to highlight some interesting things about thermal storage. It utilizes such things as molten metal, molten salts, or even cold, like liquid nitrogen. One talked about application is to convert a coal electric plant into a thermal storage facility where the excess power from the grid could heat the storage medium and then later drive generators with the stored heat. And since the grid is already connected to the plant, transmission lines shouldn't be a problem. There's lots of research money going into storage systems, so I expect to see many breakthroughs in the coming years that will significantly reduce the cost and increase the performance of these storage systems. You should be familiar with the famous duck curve shown here. The curves represent the power that is required from sources other than solar. In this graph, one day in spring in 2012 and 2020 are shown. You can see that in 2020, with more solar installed, the amount of power needed from other sources drops considerably. And in fact, California has had some time periods where the solar generation was greater than the demand, and energy had to be sent out of state or not used or curtailed, as it is called. Smoothing out this duck curve with storage will allow better utilization of energy. Section 4.8 discusses demand response. This is a method to smooth consumption of power by controlling heavy loads like water heating, air conditioning, and pumps. By smoothing out the load, the peak power requirements of the supply are reduced and can thus reduce costs for the consumer and the utility. Time of use, or TOU, is an important component of this demand management. Time of use rates are rates that are determined by the demand in certain time periods throughout the day and are being adopted in many places. So it's important to be for consumers to be aware of TOU rates, as some of these rates can be very high. Many utilities offer programs that notify users to reduce consumption when demand is high, and some of these utilities even pay for not using power during these critical times. And now I will turn it over to Jackie, who will continue with Section 5.
Thank you, Wayne. I'm going to give a brief overview of the different entities involved in producing and delivering electricity across the United States. Then I'll review the various entities that regulate electricity providers at the federal, state, and local levels. We all depend on electricity and expect it to be there when we need it. But behind the scenes, the electric system is a complicated network of thousands of entities involved in bringing electricity to your door. There are also many different players involved in regulating the system, setting prices, and ensuring that the system is safe and reliable. There are thousands of utility companies that play a part in generating electricity for our homes and offices. Most electricity is produced by investor-owned utilities and independent power producers. To a lesser degree, electricity is also generated by municipal-owned utilities and federal power agencies. Electricity is moved long distances from the power plant, such as a nuclear plant or a solar farm, along high voltage transmission lines to local distribution lines. Investor-owned utilities handle most of the transmission and about half of the distribution, with municipal utilities providing the other half of distribution. There are about 192 for-profit investor-owned utilities. They are few in number, but large in size, with billions of dollars in assets, and frequently operate in multiple states. About 75% of U.S. utility customers get their electricity from an investor-owned utility. They are legal monopolies. The rates are set by state public utility commissions, with rates generally reflecting the cost to build, finance, maintain, and operate power plants and the grid. The incentive is for the utility to build more infrastructure to pass along the cost to ratepayers. Efficiency is not a factor in setting rates. There are about 2,900 municipal utilities. They are not-for-profit entities governed by a city council or an elected or appointed board. They serve about 14% of electricity customers in the U.S. There are also 9 federal power market agencies, such as the Tennessee Valley Authority and the 4 Department of Energy power marketing administrations. Some states also have power marketing agencies. Electric cooperatives are private, not-for-profit utilities owned by their customers and operated as a business. The Rural Electrification Act of 1936 provided federal loans to electrify rural areas as part of FDR's New Deal. Rural areas were not considered profitable by investor-owned utilities and thus not served. There are more than 900 member-owned electric cooperatives, mostly in the Midwest and Southeast. In the 1990s, the federal government deregulated the generation and transmission of electric energy in order to promote competition in these markets. There are 18 states that have fully or partially deregulated their electric markets. Deregulation led to new players in the system, but it hasn't necessarily brought down prices. Customers that choose to leave a utility company as their power provider may have to pay an exit fee. Some of the new players brought about by deregulation include community choice aggregators, independent power producers, and electric power marketers. Community choice aggregators are local, not-for-profit entities that select the sources of energy, but the investor-owned utilities still provide transmission and distribution capabilities. Communities can access greener sources of generation or perhaps lower rates. 10 states have enacted community choice aggregation legislation. An example of a community that wanted greener energy but was unable to get it from their investor-owned utility is Ann Arbor, Michigan. The city created a sustainable energy utility. Michigan is a partially deregulated state and has a 100% clean electricity target for 2040. Ann Arbor created a publicly owned, locally powered utility. It provides energy from local solar and battery storage systems and networked geothermal systems. It offers energy waste reduction programs, appliance replacement initiatives, along with clean, local, and reliable energy. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, is an independent agency created in 1977 after the 1973 oil crisis. The Federal Power Act mandates that wholesale rates are just and reasonable and not unduly discriminatory or preferential. There are 5 commissioners with staggered 5-year terms. FERC regulates rates and services for interstate electric transmission and electric wholesale power sales and prohibits energy market manipulation. FERC's Office of Public Participation assists the public with commission proceedings. Other regulatory organizations include NERC, the RTOs, and NARUC. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC, is a not-for-profit international regulatory authority that ensures the reliability and security of the grid, including the impacts of climate change. The regional transmission organizations, RTOs, ensure the reliability and non-discriminatory access to the grid. The National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, NARUC, is focused on improving the quality and effectiveness of public utility regulation. This is a map of the North American Electric Reliability Corporation's 6 regions. The WECC is the Western Interconnect. ERCOT is in Texas, and the rest are in the Eastern Interconnect. This is a map of the regional transmission organizations, or RTOs. The RTOs coordinate the power flow within the interconnections. There are 2 large interconnected grids, the Eastern and the Western interconnects, and then Texas. There are 36 RTOs in the Eastern interconnection and 37 RTOs in the Western interconnection. So you can see that lots of coordination is required between these RTOs, and they must comply with standards set by NERC. 2 more important federal institutions are the Department of Energy and the EPA. The Department of Energy coordinates energy policy and develops a strategic plan. It has multiple program offices and supervises 17 national laboratories that research and develop clean energy technologies, including battery storage, renewable power, electric vehicles, carbon capture, and resilient grid infrastructure. The EPA provides renewable energy information and resources to state, local, and tribal governments. And now I will pass it along to Bill.
All right, well, thank you, Jackie. I'm going to review the final portion of the Power Talk document. Here I want to focus on 3 parts. First, renewable energy credits and carbon offsets. These are financial instruments that encourage emissions reductions. Renewable energy credits, or RECs, are payments for creating renewable energy, and carbon offsets are payments for reducing carbon emissions. These are 2 variations on a theme, that theme being how to reduce carbon emissions. RECs are a way to minimize the impact of creating electricity by creating more renewable energy, while carbon offsets minimize the impact from industrial and agricultural processes, of which there are many. You could say carbon offsets are for all the other ways to reduce emissions, other than using renewable energy instead of fossil fuels. But both of these are available now and do not require any new technology, but both require some scrutiny to maintain their effectiveness. While RECs can be tied to a specific source of creation, carbon offsets are more nebulous. They are basically a second best choice in most situations. Unfortunately, in some, they are currently the only choice, but they have a tarnished record. They are subject to fraud and often are seen as a dodge from taking more substantial efforts. When used, these should be examined and monitored carefully. For instance, my town has a 50-year contract with a coal plant, and we could not end that anytime soon. In the interim, we could buy RECs or carbon offsets. In fact, they spent $140,000 on a consultant to create a plan to build renewable energy with batteries on city property and to buy carbon offsets to counter the actual coal plant. Although there is some enthusiasm for this project, it still remains a work in process. Some of our neighbor communities were being asked to renew their 25-year coal contracts for another 20 years, and working with local advocacy groups, we were able to stop that and redirect these city councils to pursue a long-term energy plan instead. The second part I want to review is Section 6 on the planning and transition. especially Section 6.5 titled Local Governments and Energy Democracy. This is where you come in. This is key for your local league. When you go to the League of Women Voters US website, the very first line of copy says, Empowering Voters, Defending Democracy. Come back to that in a minute, but I want to note that usually smaller towns and co-ops will create or join a larger group for several reasons. Technical expertise, legal protection, buying power, all good things. These larger groups are called joint action agencies or generation and transmission co-ops, called the G&Ts. If you are in a municipal or a cooperative utility and they say your local utility is governed by the city or town councils, they frequently mean that this is who sends a representative to the joint action agency or the G&T. And those organizations are run by select executive committees that do all the work. I'm not saying they're prone to corruption or incompetence. I am not saying they practice bad management. I'm just saying they're used to doing things a certain way, a way that does not include public participation. They may use an expansive interpretation of the Open Meetings Act that leads to many key decisions being made behind closed doors during executive sessions that are not public. Unless they happen to be a very progressive group, you may find that your community is more interested in renewable energy than they are. This may make democracy very difficult. Going back to the League's statement, Empowering Voters, Defending Democracy, I want to compare this statement with what's on the website of the American Public Power Association. They say they represent 2,000 communities and 55 million people. This is what they say public power is, and I'm going to quote them here. It's only 3 or 4 lines. Like public schools and libraries, public power utilities are owned by the community and run as a division of local government. These utilities are governed by a local city council or an elected or appointed board. Community citizens have a direct voice in utility decisions, including the rate it charges and the source of electricity. Line 2 of the above quote says, your local utility is run by an appointed board. Line 3 says, community citizens have a direct voice in utility decisions, including rates and power source. Once again, unless you have a very active citizens group or a very progressive board of directors, that choice of power source will default to the appointed board, defaults to the executive committee. It's efficient, but not transparent, and it's not amenable to changes. So here's the chain of command for your local utility if it participates in a JAA, a joint action agency, or a G&T. City councils appoint a representative, likely the head of the electrical department, but it could be any city official. They make up the agency board of directors, who turn over most of the work to the executive committee. So if you go to talk to your village or city council about how they plan for future electric power, they might not have a robust grasp on that concept because they probably have never had to do that before. This is where there's a lot of room for public education, both for councils and residents. This is a perfect initiative for local leagues. I'll just conclude by saying that if you're not part of a very large corporate-owned private utility like most, you are likely one of those 2,000 communities that are a public utility, and as such, quote, community citizens have a direct voice in utility decisions, unquote. But more likely than not, they are not going to give it to you. You will have to ask for it. You will have to put the public into your public utility. Once again, section 6.5 is key. Now, part 3 of my review, I just wanted to mention briefly the recommended resources at the back of the document. They're at the end, and it looks like something you would go through after you've read the whole document. And if you have more questions, then you might search out this extra information. But that's not all it is. This is much more like a parallel universe. We could have called it alternative resources. And I'd like to encourage you to check these out, even if you don't read much of the larger document, especially the podcasts and newsletters that are an easy entry into the continuing climate story.
This concludes our presentation on Power Talk. We hope it will motivate you to learn more and to participate in advocating for renewable electric power in your area. Okay, we are back. So this video will be made available to you. And are there any questions that are in the chat? Jackie, have you seen any? Or Bill, have you seen any questions that need to come up, that have come up?
Yes, we do have one here from Carolyn Kaywood, who's also on the Virginia Climate Interest Group. I'll give a shout out to Carolyn. She asks, nuclear fusion power would be lovely, of course, but how do we convince governments that it's not practical to plan on it?
Yeah, fusion has been on the horizon for the last 50 years, 10 years away, it seems like. And I know they've made some pretty good strides right now, but it's still, it requires a lot of technology, and who knows when that's gonna happen. Also, it's a centralized form of energy, which I personally, I'm not for so much centralized energy. I'd rather see distributed, especially storage in the local areas. But fusion, if it takes a long time, we don't have that much time. I mean, we have to take action right now. Uh, as far as I can tell, we have too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere right now, and we need to get sources that are carbon free real fast. And wind and solar and geothermal do that for us right now. So I think solar is the quickest to install. So if we can install as much solar as we can, that's the way to go. And couple that with storage. Battery technology right now is really improving. And I see that, in the next 5 years, we're going to see some really interesting battery technologies. One that's already out there is sodium batteries. Sodium doesn't take any exotic minerals to make sodium batteries, and they are not quite as energy dense as lithium, but they're safe. And I see the possibility for them being used in residences, and also in cities and things near the users, where it could really do some good as far as reducing loads on the transmission lines. So you could charge up the batteries when the loads on the transmission lines are low, and then store that energy locally. And it also gives you a lot more resiliency. So that's kind of what I see is happening on the nuclear front. Maria, you had a comment?
No, can you put the QR codes up and leave them up for a bit so you can actually use them? Thanks.
Sure. I hope they actually work.
Well, sometimes I get frustrated finding things on the League US website. So if you could put a QR code or a URL in address, that would be great. In the chat, that would be great too.
Yes, let me see if I can find that.
While Wayne's working on that, I see Stephen Murphy has his hand up. It's in the up-hand corner of my screen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, good. I want to follow up on what Wayne was talking about in terms of the efficacy of solar and wind. They are the cheapest way to bring power. The entire world is moving in that direction. India has already exceeded their 5-year plan. Half of their energy is coming from solar. Pakistan in the last 2 years, not the government, but the individual farmers and poor people are buying cheap solar cells from China, and they are producing more power, 50% as much power as the industrial production of power in Pakistan. Plus, they've reduced their use of diesel fuel by 40% by using electricity. We in the United States, our government has decided that solar and wind are not to be used in America, and they're doing everything they can to stop the production of wind and solar, no matter how cheap it is, because they believe in coal and they believe in the 19th century power sources. We need to be able to basically be very clear with our elected officials that we are, as citizens, do not want to see us wasting money and harming the environment secondarily because they care about money. And I think the more information we have on the efficacy of solar and wind to talk to our legislators about, the better off we'll be. That's particularly important in all the red states. And we have a couple red states that are huge producers of solar. And yet their legislators continue to vote in a different way. I just, we need to, the next 3 years will be very challenging because the federal government is totally going to do everything it can to stop anything to do with wind and solar.
And I'll just kind of add on to what Stephen was talking about and give a shout out to Volt's podcast that they recently had one of the things holding us back on individual access to solar power is the state codes that make it to connect. They pointed out that in of a Best Buy and purchase solar panels and come home and connect them and start getting solar power. And talking about red states, Utah is the only state in the US that makes it easy to connect to solar power. They have reduce the codes that it takes to be able to connect. So maybe we can all learn something from Utah. So we do have a couple of questions in the chat as well. We have one that asks, how will AI production of energy fit into this overall scheme?
Oh, well, AI, yes. AI and cryptocurrency is taking a lot of our capacity for electricity. And I've heard projections of 40% of the electrical energy usage by I forgot what it was, 2040 or 2050 would be around 40% of all of the electricity generated in the US would be dedicated to crypto and AI, which is really, pretty large. And not too long ago, I saw a short piece on the effect of all these AI data centers being built in different communities, like Virginia and Maryland. And it's not, the typical model for the utility was to spread the costs around to all the users. But if these people are going to be using 40% of the power, they shouldn't spread that around to just the regular users because, that's giving them a huge subsidy. So that's something that we can advocate for also, to make sure that the public utilities or any other utility isn't subsidizing these AI and crypto facilities because it just raises everybody's electrical rate. And we need to lower the rates in order to actually make it more attractive to transition to an all-electric power economy.
But can AI be used like with a virtual power plant? Is there a role for AI in that?
Yes, there is. But I don't think that's going to make up for the large usage of power that they're going to be requiring. So that's something that we just have to be careful of. Another thing is, some data centers have their own generation capacity. I think Grok has, I don't know, 10 or 12 gas turbines, and they're located, on site, but they're fairly close to residential areas. So they're putting out all these exhaust gases into the neighborhood, which is also, that's a environmental justice and also health risk that is going on. So, there are plenty of opportunities for the public to be aware of, look for some of these things that might be happening in your neighborhood, and organize and see if you can't get some action. And you can certainly partner with other groups. There's certainly a lot of climate interest groups out there. So uh,
So the data center issue is going to get to be a big thing. It's kind of blowing up figuratively. The one town south of us, the developer had come towards the city staff and given them a proposal for a data center, which they turned over to the city council at a meeting 3 days later and then voted on it a week later. So that was 10 days from the inception of this project to the passing it at the city council. So there might not be a data center in your neighborhood happening right now, but maybe next week. They're almost happening that fast. It's kind of bizarre that way. And while I'm already here talking away, I think we've got a question on here from Tom Caffrey about can a local citizen leave or get out of their investor-owned utility? I believe he mentioned references Duke Utility, which is one of the nationwide largest one, and it probably spans several states. And it might depend on the particular state, but for the most part, utility law specifies that they exist as a monopoly and you are their customer. You don't get to go somewhere else. Now, you could choose to have no electricity from them at all, probably, if you go off the grid. That's a pretty daunting task. If you'll find out why there's issues with getting to be 100% renewable energy sources without batteries, because the batteries are the largest part of the expense so far. So if you had it, then you would need enough land to create storage to hold yourself for when you weren't there. So most folks still want to maintain some access to the grid. But it does depend on what's happening in your state. About half the states that have investor-owned utilities are deregulated. Some of them are semi-deregulated. In the state of Illinois, we're semi-deregulated. We have investor-owned utilities, but they do not control the power supply. We can go to our investor-owned utility and ask them for different power suppliers. Usually you have a choice of about 100 different ARES, they're called, alternative retail electrical suppliers. And you can do that, and failing to do that, there's a default supplier, but that's kind of way that's baked into the state of Illinois law. And that might be different. Jackie had a slide, I believe, up there that showed the different ownership things. That's why we talked about that a little bit. It takes a little bit of research to find out who owns the utility in your area. And if it's a large investor-owned utility, as most folks are, it's probably pretty obvious that way. And then you end up going through whoever is the utility board for your state to make changes with that. That's a big project. You got to get involved with your state actions that way.
Yeah.
And along those lines, there was a question of what tools can we use to ensure our local utilities continue to move towards renewable energy like solar and wind?
So if your local town has the capacity to form a CCA, which I'm starting to blank on it.
Community choice aggregator.
There you go,
Aggregators.
the aggregators, community choice aggregation. So even if you're an investor-owned utility sometimes, in our area, since we had our choices, the community, the city itself can actually have a referendum and vote on the referendum, and then the city council is allowed to purchase electricity with an opt-out. They don't require it, but then you're allowed to purchase electricity. Actually, it's one of two ways, with or without the opt-out. So there's two different resolutions you would have there. And then the city buys electricity. Assumably, the initiative was to get more clean energy, but sometimes the initiative is just to have their own way to be a bulk purchaser of cheaper energy. And so if they're doing a CCA, those usually have power contracts that may run 5 to 12 years, something like that. So you have to keep track of what the city council is doing with their electrical supply. So you have to contact City Hall, and most your city halls, your cities or towns will have a website that says where our electricity comes from, what's our electrical department doing. And you can find out that way, or you have to contact them, or find out if there's a local environmental group that's working on it. Join up with them. They will have already tried to suss out that issue. Otherwise, yeah, it usually takes some work. It's not the kind of thing most folks ask for, so they don't like spend a lot of time sending information out about this is how our utility works. People just take it for granted that it does work.
Yeah, and I'd like to interject here also that in our city, we have a group that attends city council meetings, and they also every week, before every meeting, they have to post an agenda, and so we pour through the agenda and look for things that might affect the climate. And if there are, we're going to go down there and speak about it. And actually, a group of about 10 people went down and attended a goal setting meeting that the city had. And we kind of demanded that we have a seat at the table to have a voice in what the city is doing as far as greenhouse gas reduction. And they decided to have a committee that would consist of some of the council members and the public and some of the city staff. And we've actually talked to some of the city staff, and we have some good relations with them. And we hope to, not only feed information to them as we find, some good options for getting cleaner energy, but we also are hoping to help them get the word out, because educating the public about greenhouse gas emissions and what we can do about it is really important. And just speaking about that, one thing that I don't think a lot of people realize is that there are electric water heaters, heat pump water heaters out there right now that operate off 120 volts. And so you can replace your gas water heater with an electric water heater by just plugging it in the wall. You don't necessarily need to touch the wiring. And so there are quite a few, at least two that I know, probably more, manufacturers of this type of water heater. So, that kind of thing, we need to get out to the residents to inform them that they do have options that, that can help reduce water heating. And in our area, water heating happens to be the largest energy usage of households. And we live in such a mild climate that, that's the big thing. One other thing, and that is electric vehicles are equipped now with bidirectional charging. So you can charge up your car and actually power your house. And that's more and more manufacturers are going to that. And pretty soon the utilities, some are reluctant to do it, but they're going to be forced to allow people to run their homes or at least augment their power from an electric car. And that's really good. I'm in a fire-prone area, and so if our grid goes down, I could drive to a remote location, power up my car, come back and keep my house going. So it's the cheapest way of adding storage to your home right now is an electric vehicle. And I'm really hopeful that that's going to really take off. And I think it will, because it just makes so much sense. Go ahead, Bill.
I'll just inject quickly in there. You're almost brushing up against something called virtual power plants. So I'll make sure most folks have heard of that. In Illinois, we've got legislation coming up in a veto session next month, and we hope to have elements of virtual power plants instituted in there where the utilities would then tap into your, whatever all of these things are out there and use that for some of the power supply, and it minimizes the amount of new power plants they have to build. It's this idea that the data centers are going to balloon the demand that's driving the need to build power plants all over the place. And just anticipating that works into the market pricing. So it's caused utility bills in Illinois, from the Atlantic coast, certainly the PJM grid region and MISO both to escalate just because of the anticipation of them might need more fuel in the future. And something like virtual power plants would utilize some of the things that were already existing. So that actually helps cut your cost. So it sounds like something that's kind of like weird and spacey and goofy out there, but if you hear your local utilities or folks talking about VPPs, it's something you might want to get catch up a little bit on. I wanted to answer a question here from Ruth Sandven about can the league remain true to its principles and come up with positions to support public power over investor-owned utilities? And I have to say, I've been working in this area specifically for a couple of years now, and that question has never come up before. And it's a little fraught with problems because I know with an investor-owned utility, those are regulated by your public utility board in Illinois. It's called the Illinois Commerce Commission. Somebody by law is regulating that monopoly. And through state laws and legislation, you can direct them in certain directions. With the public-owned utilities, in my presentation, I described how they go through these machinations of creating joint action agencies and G&Ts that run the show. And from your city council, you're trying to get them to make changes there. And you're like one member of many, and it's opaque and it's distributed. So it doesn't necessarily turn out to be a good thing. Like I said, if you have a very progressive one, it works well. I think there's some places like Colorado, Maine, Minnesota, some of the co-ops and stuff have actually gotten ahead of the game and have decided they wanted to go to clean energy and close down some coal plants. And it was a wonderful thing. But if they're not of that mind and they're thinking we're fine with coal plants, and then getting them to change their mind is very difficult. So it's different to be a public utility than to be an investor-owned utility, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to change. We just went through some contract negotiations with that, and they make a big deal about trying to tell people, this is public utility. You have a vote. You have a voice. You want to do this. Well, we do want to have public utilities, but we want to have an effective voice, not just a one vote. So it's a lot of work still. That's not an easy single answer either.
And I was just going to step in and follow up on what Wayne was talking about as far as heat pump water heaters. There's a website in our resources that is Rewiring America, which is a wonderful resource to look at your own uses of energy and how you can electrify your own home, and has some great ideas of the analysis you can take and steps you can take to go all electric. So, and in the chat, there was another question that was asking about nuclear fission and the nuclear waste that comes from that. Is any comments on communities that have become storage for radioactive waste?
I can't comment on that, but I can comment that there is a nuclear plant down in, where is it, down in Orange County area on the California coast that got shut down. And so now all the ratepayers that were getting power from that unit are now paying a decommissioning fee. So that is like 12% of our bill now, I think, is decommissioning a nuclear power plant. Yeah, I'm not, personally, I'm not for nuclear, and the league isn't very supportive of it either. It does take quite a bit of mining to get the uranium, and it does take some energy and some, so. And the other thing is to build a nuclear plant takes a long time now. I mean, it's even and these small modular reactors, which were supposed to be real popular, a lot of companies have gone under just because they haven't been able to sell many of them. So I hope we can avoid that. I'm not in favor of shutting anything down right now that's in operation, but I think solar and wind, and especially geothermal, I think are going to really fill in could really do it for us. Go ahead, Bill.
So I want to reply to Amy Sherwood's comment. It's awesome in there. I kind of energy gets complicated. Talk about a lot of different things. People are talking about exiting your investor-owned utility and what can you get your local community to do. And I was responding, kind of focusing on what we do about the power source. You know, can we get renewable energy instead of coal and oil and gas and stuff? But aside from regardless of who is your utility and where the power source for electricity is, there's an awful lot of ways that you use power for gasoline and gas in your communities, and a lot of that can be transitioned. And yeah, absolutely, there you can be champions and advocate at city councils that the municipality itself starts buying electrical vehicles, put solar panels on the municipal buildings, start maybe using ground source heat pumps for future buildings. There's a lot of excellent work to be done in the ways we use electricity as opposed to how we create electricity. It's called electrification generally, and that's also usually tagged as one of the things that's driving the increased need for electricity, something that hasn't happened for the past 2 decades. The need for electricity has been decreasing as people have been, especially industry, incorporating energy efficiency moves and dropping it down. So they're caught a little flat-footed with the grid. Also, the grid is made up of folks who run the current system, and they're not in any hurry to change it any faster than they have to. So they're also tasked with making certain that it's stable and what they have works, and they're a little reluctant to change it too fast because it's going to be expensive and dangerous. So there's a lot of work at the federal level with FERC trying to get them to step it up and do something and get some more high tension lines built so there can be more competition. And some of that is starting to happen, not fast enough. It's a whole other area that we could use a lot more stuff happening. Some of our new legislation will be grid enhancing technologies that don't require new power lines to be built, but rather to make the current ones more efficient. They can carry more power than they do now through hardware and software advancements, where we have the investor-owned utilities that are directed by our Interstate Commerce Commission. Through this legislation, we can tell them to do it. Where it's run by the municipal utilities or it's run by the public-owned utilities, the first thing that they say whenever you meet them is, "Hi, we are not regulated by your Interstate Commerce Commission. You can't tell us to do anything. Go talk to your city council." So that's an area where it's a little difficult to do that too. But yeah, lots of work to be done at the municipal area. Probably the first thing to do is find and form a group. If you're down there all on your own, you'll kind of get burnt out pretty fast and dispirited. But if you can find other groups that are working on it, or create a working group within your own local league and maybe partner up with other towns. We formed a separate group called Tri-Cities Clean Energy with the 3 communities all around us to take on city councils and how they're handling contracts. So that's once you get a group going, then everything starts to be much more effective that way.
And I'll
Okay.
throw in, I saw somebody was a member of Third Act, which is the senior arm of the 450.org. And I think there's Sunday coming up, which is, I think it's September 21st to promote solar power. So Third Act would be a good group to align with as well.
All right. Well, it's 11 o'clock. And so really appreciate all you attending. And I hope this has been worthwhile. And we will be sending out notices to you about where you can get the recordings. And let's see. We'll also tell you, give you an email address that you can email us to get some more information or whatever. So thank you very much, and we will have good greenhouse gas reductions.